Every professional creative will experience annoying feedback at some time. And by annoying, for us, any request for changes to the artwork we send to our clients. If we're honest, anytime we get a request for making some kind of a change, it kind of grates us in the wrong way, right? And I think that's because we have fragile feelings, big egos, and very little time. Feedback can come in many different forms, but there are two overarching categories: reasonable and unreasonable. Feedback is reasonable when you can imagine yourself being in the client's shoes and asking for it yourself. It's in line with everybody's expectations of what you, as the commercial artist, are meant to provide as a service. Reasonable feedback is within the scope and boundaries of the creative brief that you set up at the beginning of the job. Reasonable feedback expects good quality work and a positive customer experience. Think about how you want to be treated by the professional serving you, perhaps a contractor renovating your house or a barista at the coffee shop. You want to be treated fairly and responded to with kindness and due concern. Unreasonable feedback, on the other hand, is just the opposite. If you're receiving feedback from a client that's unreasonable either in substance or in tone, which you couldn't imagine giving yourself, then you know you have a problem. Unreasonable feedback falls outside of what you should be expected to do, and it falls outside the scope of the work as defined in the brief. Unreasonable feedback expects the impossible. Perhaps it expects that you be someone that you're not, or that you perform some kind of sorcery or telepathic feat. Sure, the client feedback can seem ridiculous at times, but unreasonable feedback doesn't always come from a malicious place. It's often just from a breakdown in communication or a lack of understanding about what's fair on the part of the client. But more important, if you're like many creatives, receiving feedback of either type, reasonable or unreasonable, can feel the same. Finding that we got something wrong or that our work is unappreciated, especially where it comes to matters of subjective taste, stings. So when receiving feedback, if you're of the artist's temperament, as I am, where it never feels good to be asked to try again, it's important to pause for a moment. The temptation is to react right away, defensively. I've written many email drafts in response to feedback, pages long, describing my reasoning for my decisions and making sure the client knows how very wrong-headed they are. And then thankfully, most of the time I realize how such an approach will do nothing to advance the work, nor to make the client feel good, nor to cast me in a particularly professional light. What happens as I write out my defense is that I realize that I could be spending this time just addressing the client's concerns in the actual work. As I write out my treatises and defenses, along the way I start to realize that the feedback isn't as unreasonable as I first felt, and I actually start to see solutions to the problems. I realize I can probably make the changes and keep my sense of creative authority intact, and in fact, the art often gets better. And so does my sense of satisfaction in the job. I'm not just serving my own artistic needs, but I'm actually helping someone else. People don't just want a product or a service, they want to feel helped and respected. I know I do. Where it comes to addressing client feedback, it's important that you spend some time considering whether it's worth defending yourself or if you should just solve the problem. It's usually faster, and ultimately nobody but you cares as much about your artistic genius and all the clever thinking that went into whatever you first showed the client. If the feedback is reasonable, there is a reasonable solution to it, and you can likely do it in a reasonable amount of time. If the client's reasonable and you have been responsible with your time so far, meeting deadlines and such, then if time is a concern, you can usually ask for a little bit more time to get things right. If the feedback is unreasonable, you can calmly point this out to your client without being defensive. You can explain how the request falls outside the boundaries of your project. You can explain what you do and how that differs from whomever or whatever else they are expecting you to be. And where it comes to expectations of magic and mind reading, there's a diplomatic approach to steering the client back on track. Ask them to clarify what they mean. Ask them to describe what's working or not working with what you sent. In short, ask them to be specific. I don't think there's a more beautiful word for an artist who can't read minds. Specific. This is the word that pops up most often when I'm in dialogue with a client over their change requests, especially where an illustration project starts to feel more like a guessing game. So have you ever been in a situation where you're working with a client and you show them your first sketches or whatever, and they're like, none of it's working. So you make some changes and then you say, what about this? And then again, they're like, none of this is working. And then you do this over and over again. Maybe the next time you show them like 4 or 5 different things just to cover your bases, throw things at the wall, see what sticks. And again, they just don't like any of it. What happens here is really frustrating. The whole creative process seems to just go off the rails, and it never goes well after that, in my experience. If this situation is familiar to you, you're not alone. And be assured, this type of dialogue should never exist between you and your client. And we ourselves should never be the no-sayer in any kind of professional client relationship. You know, when someone's serving us with some kind of service, we shouldn't just say it's not working. We need to explain what's not working for us. Why isn't it working for us? And we can work with them toward a solution, right? It's frustrating for everyone and a waste of time otherwise. So spend some time up front defining the problem that is to be solved, along with all the constraints and considerations, and always hold it as the roadmap for the project. This is also known as the brief. It takes some time up front, and it's not always easy to bring it up in the middle of a project, like to say, you know, in the brief we said this, but now we're asking for this. It's kind of awkward to bring it up. But by doing this, it helps keep the project on track and ultimately save everyone's time. When feedback comes, as it usually does, you can weigh it against the brief. And of course you can ask, is the feedback reasonable? What would you expect if you were in the client's shoes? What would you be allowed to ask for? Maybe the client isn't being specific enough about what they want. It's not your job to guess, but it should be your job to lead the client toward knowing for themselves more specifically what they want. And this is what I mean by solving the problem and not getting mad. When you get feedback, ask how you can address the client's concern or respond to their feedback in the most helpful way, as long as it doesn't compromise anything major for you as an artist, a professional, or a human being. Chances are, as annoying as it might seem in the moment, it's not a big deal. The feedback's not a big deal. Be a professional, stay positive, and maintain your integrity. Serve the client because they're paying you to do so, and serve them as you would want to be served yourself. My name's Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and a creatively empowering teacher. You can see all of my classes at tomfroese.com/teaching. Thank you for watching. Please give this a like if you feel I've earned it, and subscribe to the channel to always know when new videos go up. I'll see you in the next one.